right, this is exciting, isn't it?
Here we go, guys, in 5, 4, 3. Here we go.
It's time for Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive.
Thank you for the good programming, and I appreciate the content and really enjoyed every moment.
It's a privilege to have you on your station and listen. It's good stuff. It's very educational.
It's time for Joan Esposito on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
Thank you so much for being here this Friday, April 4th. Wow. If you are planning to go to the hands-off, one of the many hands-off protests, because they're going to be everywhere, you should know some things. You should think about some things. I don't think here in Illinois or in the Chicago area we're going to be in any trouble. But who knows? Especially in Chicago, who knows if Trump has sent any people to spy on the protests, especially in downtown Chicago. So I, on Blue Sky, posted a link to a recently updated article that originally was in Verge magazine in 2020. They updated it just in February about how to be as secure as you can possibly be. There have been in the past accusations that certain people in law enforcement can set up equipment that mimics a cell tower. So instead of your phone pinging off a legitimate cell tower, it pings off their equipment, which gives them an opportunity to get a lot of information about you. So here's the thing. You should read the Verge article because, man, it goes into great detail about what to do and how to do it. Here's some highlights. If you have a smartwatch, leave it at home. Don't wear it. Don't wear it to the protests tomorrow. If at all possible, if you can leave your phone home, that would be great too. But if you, say, want to record videos or take pictures, first of all, you should be very careful how you do either of those things. And you should be very careful about identifying other people at the protest. Should your phone information be scooped up by law enforcement? Should your phone be scooped up by law enforcement? You don't want to have that particular location tagged. You don't want to have people who are recognizable unless you have their permission. Not a great idea. If you have fingerprint ID or face ID on your phone, disable them. Here's a weird quirk about our laws. If law enforcement takes your phone, they can legally force you to use your face or your fingerprint to open the phone. But if your phone can only be accessed through a passcode, that passcode is protected in your constitutional rights. That's part of your right to free speech. So if you have the face ID and the fingerprint ID disconnected and you can only get into the phone with a passcode, you can refuse legally to give them the passcode. You cannot refuse to give them your face or your fingerprint. If you are concerned, put your phone in airplane mode. And by the way, disconnecting, if you've already set up Face ID, it can be kind of tricky to get rid of it. I decided today that I was going to, frankly, the Face ID doesn't work very well anyway. 3/4 of the time it tells me that it doesn't recognize me. Stupid phone. So I'm just in the process of disabling it. But if you have lost phone protection on, it makes it more difficult. There are two aspects of Face ID that I went to disable today, and it told me that there was, to make sure, I don't know, something that to do with, whether or not my phone was stolen. I had to wait 1 hour before my request to turn off Face ID was viable, which seems like a ridiculous thing, but I'm sure it serves a purpose that I don't understand. On my particular iPhone, there's also something I discovered called lockdown mode. As I was searching to try to figure out how to shut off Face ID, I stumbled across lockdown mode. And if you can't figure out how to do the Face ID, you might want to look for the lockdown mode button, because that's like an emergency setting where you can pretty much just shut off access to pretty much everything. Like I said, disabling Face ID, I have found that to be not as straightforward a process as you might think. But it can be done, and that is one of the big protections. But this article that like I said, was originally put together how to protect your privacy and security in 2020 when people were protesting Trump the last time around. They've updated it with new message. But, bottom line is leave everything home if you can. And remember, I don't know about Android, but with an Apple, even when my phone is locked, I have a camera icon on the lock screen. So I can keep my phone locked, and if I want to take a picture, I can still take a picture. But again, get rid of biometrics and make everything password protected. If there's a way to encrypt your data, do that. Turn on airplane mode to keep your phone from broadcasting information about you. And there's all different other kinds of recommendations. Securing your social media accounts. If you really want to take the step of using a VPN, which is it's a way to protect all of your data and make it much more difficult to access. I posted a link to this Verge article if you want to read all the nitty-gritty. It's titled How to Secure Your Phone Before Attending a Protest. And sad to say that in earlier protests that I was a part of, I never really worried about it. But I'm worried about it now. The other big story of the day, the stock market. Whew! You thought yesterday was bad? Today's worse. Wall Street Journal headline, stocks in free fall. At the time of this posting, the Dow was down more than 2,000 points. There's an editorial in the Wall Street Journal written by the editorial board about these tariffs. Here's just a few sentences. It starts off this way. President Trump said there would be, quote, a little disturbance from his tariffs. But how does he define little? The stock market yesterday, suffered its worst day since the government shut down the economy in March 2020. Not to worry, the White House says tariffs will eventually be worth the pain. Feeling better? Goes on to say there is the not-so-small matter of the rule of law. Mr. Trump justifies his tariffs by declaring a national emergency under the 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act. No previous president has used this law to impose tariffs. And then it ends up this way. Mr. Trump's tariffs are the biggest policy shock to the world trading system since Richard Nixon blew up Bretton Woods in 1971. As with that decision, Mr. Trump is acting with little understanding about the damage his tariffs will cause. The, quote, disturbance might not be as little as he imagines. We are going to take a real quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk to Terry Savage about what is going on in the markets. We'll be back after this.
Podcasts of Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, YouTube, and Amazon. Just search for Joan Esposito.
You're listening to WCPT 820 because facts matter.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
financial book author, columnist, advisor to millions of people. Terry Savage joins us now. She is the smartest person I know when it comes to anything involving investing and business. Terry, how are you? Personally, not professionally today.
I'm exhausted. Of course, it's been the last few days. Right now, as we speak, just at the close, the market was down over 2,100 points, down about 1,900 points on the Dow, over 1,000 yesterday. The market has dropped well over 7% in the last few days since the extent, the breadth, the depth, the magnitude of the tariffs was announced on Wednesday morning.
Donald Trump and I think Elon Musk actually also said this at one point, that there was going to be some pain before we get to this Eden, this nirvana where Trump's economic vision makes life better for everyone. I have not read one single professional economist or business thought leader who agrees with that. What goes through your mind when you hear Trump saying, oh, it's just going to be a little disturbance at the beginning and then it's going to be awesome?
Only for you would I tell you my immediate thought, which was that it was like Moses leading his followers to the promised land. Believe in me that we will get there. And of course, Moses had the help of God to part the Red Sea. I think that getting to the promised land means many of the followers are going to drown trying to get there. The land may be promised on the other side. It may be better for America to have more industrial jobs and better paying jobs and to be more independent when it comes to everything from our pharmaceuticals to our auto industry and so forth. However, getting from here to there is clearly going to cause a lot of pain. Now, I know I heard you talking about the ordinary person. The impact of these tariffs already have hit business decisions. What business executive could make a plan? You know, you don't build a factory or even start up an old factory that's been dormant. You just can't do that overnight.
Right.
And the uncertainty around all this is rippled through everything. I'll give you one quick thing. I was talking to a gal I know who owns a hair salon, and she was saying, gosh, the business is so slow. People, I think, are waiting longer between getting their hair colored and the nail techs. They've got their customers, but they're no longer paying extra for the fancy designs, which is where the girls really make their money. And she said, Terry, I got to tell you, we're going to have to raise our prices. All the hair color we use is imported, and everything coming in is at least 10% more. I mean, these are just ordinary people, and she's worried about, you know, how will she pay her rent on the store, and how are her clients and her employees pay theirs.
I've read differing estimates of what these tariffs are going to cost, quote-unquote, average folks, anywhere from $2,000 to just over $4,000 a year. Does that seem about right to you?
You know, I don't think that that's how you're going to feel this, actually. I think the impact is going to be on stuff that you never realized was impacted. Don't forget, now we have 10% across-the-board tariffs. And then we can discuss whether this will continue. But the other tariffs are huge. And then, of course, China has put its defenses up, but we haven't heard from Europe yet. So I think when you go to the bar and you say, I'll have a Modelo, they're going to say, okay, that's $20. When you say, I'll have some guacamole and chips with that, we're not serving guacamole anymore because we can't get avocados. They come from Mexico. Or they're too expensive. We can't just put those out. That's a $25 appetizer. Across the board, you go to the dollar store, nothing will be $1. Everything will be $5 to $10 because all of that stuff is imported. And then the services impact that the people that have to spend more money on everything will not be spending money on services like getting their nails done. So The Fed chairman said today, we're going to be watching closely. Is this going to be a one-time price increase impact? Or is this going to ping-pong around the economy and create these expectations of ongoing higher prices, then the Fed would have to raise rates. But if the tariffs kind of make everything slow down and we have a recession and more unemployment, then you would see rates come down. And in the bond market today, interest rates did come down, anticipating an economic slowdown. So that recession could impact you. It's not about the $2,000 or $3,000 per person. It's about how does your life change?
Terry, I'm still reeling from the fact that hair color is imported. I had no idea.
I didn't know that. I mean, it's L'Oreal. I guess maybe it's French. I don't even know what the name of the color is. She said Italy and France. So,
wow.
What did I know?
That is amazing.
Seriously, that's frivolous. But the point is, when you hear someone say that my customers are ordinary working people, and, if they stretch out their appointments, then they won't get the haircut. I mean, she's worried about her making a living. Or they'll get their nails polished, but not the super designs. It costs so much. We saw that in the consumer confidence figures that have fallen off a cliff in the last 2 months. Now, someone out there is going to say, well, wait a minute. The economy is still strong. We have these unemployment numbers today. The economy looks very strong. Those numbers were collected in the second week in March, well before all of this. Just take a look around, and you'll see the signs that the airline stocks are down. The cruise ship stocks are down. Lululemon gets everything from... And then one more thing. All the companies that 4 or 5 years ago got the message, we don't want to be dependent on China. Okay, they said, we'll move our supply chains. We will move to Bangladesh. We'll move to Vietnam. And then the tariffs on those countries were higher even than China. So... I just read somewhere that a cost of an Apple iPhone would go up 43%. I mean, you just have no idea how things will impact you. The things you take for granted as being available, not just the stuff you buy on Amazon. But how about this? You buy all that stuff on Amazon that comes wrapped in those, little gray, I do that, plastic things that get shipped directly from China. Now there'll be a $25 tariff on each package. So you're not getting any, cute T-shirts or whatever it is you import. But it's not just the fact that stuff will be more expensive. Think about all those people who drive for Amazon, run around, drop it off on your front porch. If that's not happening, then a lot of people who do that to earn money aren't going to have a job.
That's the part that I think is really scary, and that is not always readily apparent at the beginning of some of these moves. The dominoes. It's like, a theater venue closes. Oh, that's too bad they couldn't get funding. But then the restaurants around the theater venue are also hurting, and some of them close. And maybe parking garages that had extra income on theater night. Maybe, it's just, you can't even imagine sometimes how one action can impact an entire array of businesses. It's why when a factory closes, it isn't just the factory and that company that's in trouble. All of the businesses that all of those workers supported then suffer. I think that the hurt is going to keep unfolding, and we're going to keep seeing stories like your hairdresser told you.
I think Walt Disney had it right. It's a small world after all. If you ever went to Disney with your kids, that song rings in your ears.
Yes.
But that's what we're about to notice. I think the goal of this move, policy, whatever you want to call it, is that America should be self-contained. That happened. That used to be the way. But the supply chains of the world. Let me give you another perspective. Now you're in France or you're in Canada, and you say, I'm not going to buy anything American. The Canadians aren't buying American whiskey. The French, we're going to get tariffs on their cheese or their wine or whatever. But think of the impact when they say, we're not going to walk into a Starbucks in France or in Germany. We're not going to go into a McDonald's, even though those McDonald's are owned locally. The impact on American brands and businesses that have established themselves overseas is going to be huge. And that's why you see all those things suddenly and surprisingly, because no one expected these tariffs to be this dramatic, reflected in stocks across the market, which is why you now have the Dow, which was not long ago at 48,000, now trading at 38,600.
I think I read a month or so ago that the one product that is most imported by Canadians was Kentucky bourbon, and that the distilleries in Kentucky were terrified for these Canadian tariffs. And, you know, there's a growing movement. I don't know if Macron suggested this in France, but there is now talk of the rest of the world boycotting American goods, not wanting them at any price.
Well, it's happened in Canada. They boo the national anthem because hockey teams are both Canadian and American and so forth. Baseball, too, that'll happen. There's a whole thing. I have so many friends in Canada who just will not buy anything in America. And, in fact, I have friends who had a home in Florida who told me that they just put their house on the market. I mean, that has to do more with, they should be our 51st state. I mean, the impunity of it all is astounding. And the interesting thing is, I think Macron might be leading a movement to get all of Europe and other countries together to have a trading bloc amongst themselves and cut America out. It's just very short-sighted. And you remember your high school history, the Smoot-Hawley tariff, which once our economy was in a terrible economic slowdown, they said, well, we'll fix this. We'll put borders up, and that will mean that we'll make everything here, and the jobs will come to America. And the Smoot-Hawley tariff, if you remember History 101, is widely credited with isolating America and leading us deep into the Great Depression. I hope that's not how we look back on the great Trump tariffs.
If you can hang on a couple more minutes, we have to go to break. I know I promised you we'd be done at 2:30, but I just have a few more questions.
Sure,
if you can hang on for another 10 minutes. And Lady B, I know this is an oldie but a goodie in our array, but Terry just referenced it. I think we have to play that clip from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Please play it and then just go to break.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the the Great Depression, passed the a tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which raised or lowered tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression.
This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
It is Friday, and we are going to open up the phone lines. We are going to start reading your texts, but I have Terry Savage, and I still have a couple more questions. We are seeing one of the worst stock market drops today that we have seen, well, since yesterday. Terry,
my two-day round is huge.
Yeah. I went to a program, the City Club program Wednesday, where Tom Skilling and Tom Wobbles spoke about climate change, and the deep-seated fear that they expressed was with all the cuts to NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and with all the cuts to universities, the fear is we've always been a science leader, and we've done that because we fund science, we fund scientists, we fund science, we fund research, and there's a real fear that if this cutback continues, we may fall so far back in the race for knowledge that it will be years, if we recover at all, as the rest of the world moves forward. I worry about that with what's going on economically. You talked about Macron organizing a European trading bloc without us. This feels like something that has the potential to hurt us long after Trump is gone. Do you think that's right?
Joan, if you started to make a list that what you're going to discuss at dinner tonight and tomorrow night with all of your friends about all the things you have to worry about vaccines, about immigration, you're moving way out of my territory. Let me say this, that it looks to me that in so many ways, it looks like if you made a movie out of this, that's why the Onion magazine doesn't exist anymore. There is no satire here. We are living in a satire. I invite everybody to come to terrysavage.com. Everybody should know by now, I sell nothing. I don't have any clients. I have loaded up my website with tons of resources. You can see the last 4 or 5 weeks of columns. I wrote about tariffs on February 4th. I wrote about the possibility of a recession on March 10th. I've got interviews with some really smart people on my Friends Talk Money podcast. And my whole goal is to keep you out of trouble. So while I have just 3 minutes of your time, I want to make this point to everybody who's listening. I know you discuss politics all the time. I can't do anything about that. And I've decided I can't. I mean, I'm of course upset about everything from science and air traffic controllers and climate change and all those things. My lane is personal finance. I think that unless the president comes back in 3 days and said, I've talked to Vietnam, they've agreed to everything, so we're going to have no tariffs. And I've talked to Xi in China, and they're going to open up their, that could happen. Maybe he wins that way, and there's no tariffs, and the world grows, and there's a boom. That could happen. But if it doesn't, and boy, have we damaged our credibility anyway, I think you need to protect your personal finances in the following ways. This is the time to get yourself out of debt. People say, well, I can't get out of debt. I wouldn't be in debt in the first place if I didn't have to be in debt. Go to terrysavage.com. There's a red box on the homepage, Dealing with Debt in the New Year. I saw this coming. How to get to the National Foundation for Credit Counseling. If you have a job, see if you can make some extra money on weekends. This is not the time to be overspending. The reason the airline and cruise stocks are down is because people are going to pull in their belts. Don't be the last one that's overextended. As far as your 401k, you're younger, keep putting that $300 or $400 a month out of your paycheck in the S&P 500 fund. It buys a lot more shares today than it did 3 weeks ago, okay? But if you're older and you're retired, people say, I'll take it out of my IRA. Don't take it out, you'll pay taxes. But do look at what you own inside your IRA, and you could, with a phone call this afternoon, say, move out of the stock fund or move half of it out just into the money market fund. You won't get rich, you won't get poor. Know what you have and make sure you're not being, you don't want to sell in a panic. We're well into the panic now, but this could be a long weekend unless we have some good news. And Monday could look even worse.
Okay.
Sorry to end on that gloomy note. You can read all of that at terrysavage.com.
But that's good advice. The good advice is people have to protect themselves. They absolutely have to do. They have to do whatever it takes. Terry, I love you. Thank you for doing this.
Thanks, sweetie.
Always appreciate it. Okay, we're going to, you know what? Before we go to break, I want to share with you some. Tim Walz was on MSNBC with Chris Hayes, and they talked. Tim Walz is becoming one of my most favoritist politicians. He was talking about trade wars with Chris Hayes on MSNBC, especially trade wars with our allies, which is what we're doing. And I think this guy makes so much sense. Listen to this.
Have you ever encountered in the wild, I mean, really, just like out of the mouth of someone at a doorstep or a diner, like, I hate those Canadians who are ripping us off. We got to get back at them. Have you ever, I'm asking this. Have you ever, independent of President Trump, encountered that view in the wild?
Never. And I think, it could be a bit of a stereotype or whatever. I find that it is about as close to any stereotype of being true, the decency of Canadians and the neighborliness and the being there. And I think the thing that irritates me about our allies is, I mentioned this last summer, I was, on the anniversary of the D-Day invasion, and to see those graves while you go to the American cemetery, the French cemetery, Canadians, Australians, all of these people that he says are ripping us off, the Danes, it's an outrageous affront to folks who share our values on democracy, and for him to mock them and to say this about Canada, that they're nasty people. The thing I think that starts to have to set in, and I would argue that what happened in Wisconsin is that there's buyer's remorse on this, and nobody signed up for this. Nobody signed up to insult the Canadians and drive up potash prices. Nobody expected to see tariffs that were just randomly thrown on that are going to punish, especially middle-class Americans. So no, your question is right. But look, I don't think this guy listens to anyone other than himself, and he's convinced this is going to work. But my beef still comes to this. There are senators that need to stand up and say something on the Republican side. There are Senate leadership that needs to step up and put an end to this, because this is real pain. Look, we saw it. It's those miners. Today we laid off 170 infectious disease experts at the Minnesota Department of Health. We have warnings that our low-income heating program is going to be rescinded. The entire agency in the federal government that gets those checks out for low-income heating assistance are gone. We don't know who's going to send the checks. It snowed today in Minnesota, and those are the things that are gone. So we're making it very clear. This is not about government employees. It's not about some fake efficiencies. We're all for that, This is about real people and the impact, and this is going to do real damage.
Going to do real damage. That's us, folks. We are the ones who are going to experience the real damage. Just as I was shocked when the hairdresser told Terry Savage that prices to get hair color were going to go up because the hair dye they use is imported. How many other things that we use in our lives that we buy do we not even realize where they come from? I mean, I don't decide whether or not to buy something, but like if I'm buying an item of clothing, usually on the tag it'll say made in Vietnam or give you some sort of idea where it came from. And I never thought twice about it, really. But now each and every one of those items that is made abroad, because a lot of clothing is made abroad, they're all going to be more expensive, and they're going to be more expensive immediately, if not sooner. Unbelievable. Before I start taking phone calls, I want to share one more sound clip. Hakeem Jeffries, the leader of the Dems in Congress, was talking about this pain that Donald Trump and Elon Musk said that we had to go through to get to this perfect world that's on the other side. Hakeem Jeffries talked about that. I want you to listen to this.
It's absolutely right. And the notion that everyday Americans need to absorb pain brought to us by Donald Trump and his group of MAGA billionaires is ridiculous. It's outrageous. Every single one of the House Republicans and Senate Republicans supporting this kind of reckless approach, this unnecessary trade war, need to be thrown out of office and held accountable for the pain that they are intentionally inflicting on the American people. We have to ask the question, this is probably the first time in our history that an American president is intentionally crashing the economy and driving us toward a recession. He didn't tell us about this when he was on the campaign trail last year. They have no mandate for any of this, no mandate to cut Medicaid, no mandate to try to take away Social Security. Certainly, they don't have any mandate to drive this country into a recession, which is going to hurt hardworking American taxpayers and families all across the land.
I want to share a text that came in from Kristen in Minnesota. Hi, Joan. Please tell listeners, boomers, we are needed. We have time. We have resources. We have resolve. We are coming. See you April 5th. We'll be back with more after this.
There's no excuse to miss Joan Esposito.
It's number one on my stereo.
Live, local, and progressive. You can listen to her daily at WCPT820.com on your computer or phone.
Alexa, play WCPT.
WCPT from TuneIn.
Joan Esposito. Join the conversation now at 773-763-9278.
I'm trying to use the phone!
Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
That last text I read was, of course, about the big protests scheduled for all around the country. And not just in our area, not just Chicago. A lot of suburbs are going to have their own hands-off protest. You can go to Move On, you can go to Indivisible Chicago, or just Google hands off near me, and you can find a protest near you. Kristen's right. A lot of boomers have the time and the money to do this kind of stuff. Plus, we're of an age where, you know what, you want to arrest me? Fine. It's not like, it's going to keep me from getting a job down the road. I also want you to know Scott Duff is planning to be at the hands-off protest. Edwin Eisendrath, look for him as well. He's still going to do his show. He actually has pre-taped his big picture show so that he can be downtown. And remember, if you want a primer in how to protect yourself, if you can go directly to the site, the publication is called The Verge, theverge.com, and they have updated and reprinted an article about digital security that they first posted in March or June of 2020, June of 2020. And it has really good advice about how to keep your digital footprint as tiny as possible when you go to a march. And thank you to the listener who texted in that that system that I talked about where law enforcement can set up what amounts to the technology that mimics a cell tower. So if you're there and you have your smartphone turned on and it's not in airplane mode, instead of pinging off a regular cell tower, it can ping off this other cell tower, and law enforcement can collect a lot of data off of your phone. The other thing to be careful, and that system is called Stinger. Thank you. Thank you to the listener who remembered what it was called. And remember, if you take pictures, make sure that you don't have anybody identified by face who doesn't want to be identified as being at the protest. For example, if there's a family and one member of the family is undocumented, doesn't have paperwork, that person doesn't want to be in your pictures. So be careful. Be careful about who you shoot and how you shoot it, okay? And lock down your phone, put it on airplane mode. If you can't leave it at home, definitely don't wear your smartwatch. Turn off Face ID, fingerprint ID. That's a summary. I have tweeted out a link to the article on Blue Sky, and Andy said that he is going to be adding it to my information on the WCPT website. It's going to be on my show page, the link to the article. Okay? Whew. Okay, let's get to the phone lines now. I've been busy with a text line. We're going to go to the phone lines. Marty is on the line from Chicago. Hey, Marty, thanks for the call today.
Hey, Joan, thanks for taking my call. No, I wanted to remind everybody about what happened, back in 2019 when we had another trade war that Trump started with China. And the result of it was supply chains were severely, severely disrupted. And the thing that we could not get the most when we needed it was personal protective equipment, PPE. Nurses were reusing masks like frontline workers when we had this deadly pandemic. The reason why we didn't have all of this stuff that we needed was because Trump tried to trade war his first administration, and it really messed up our supply chains, and that's why we were unable to get all the stuff that we needed. started. It ended up way more people ended up dying than needed to, partially because we couldn't get the right equipment here, partially because Trump started all of the trade wars he did with China his first go-around when he first tried this. I mean, now it's like a global, now he's
the
starting a trade war with everybody.
Yeah,
but,
the tariffs Trump tried to or did put in place in his first administration, they were, I don't think they exceeded 10%, but they still, remember when all the farmers, when China said, okay, Illinois farmers, we're never going to buy your soybeans ever again. We're going to buy them from Brazil and other places. And Illinois farmers were so hard hit, as were other farmers, that Trump ended up sending all the farmers checks. The amount of money that he sent farmers in checks so far exceeded any possible boost he thought he was going to get from the tariffs that it was just absurd. But, when COVID shut things down, that really was a main contributor to the supply chain disruption, because no cargo ships were moving, no cargo was being unloaded. It was a mess. It was a mess. And now that they're dismantling the CDC and Health and Human Services, let's pray, Marty, that we don't have another pandemic.
Well, we will have a supply shortage if we do. I mean, because these people are not going to send us masks and the other stuff that we would need to combat, another widespread pandemic. We're going to once again run into a situation where we will not be able to have the equipment we need to protect ourselves. And we can base it all back to these dumb trade wars that don't need to be going on right now. We should be strengthening our supply chains in case we do have another pandemic, where the thing that we need the most from these countries are the stuff that's made in other countries, like masks and protective equipment, all the stuff they use in the hospitals and stuff. We'll run into another situation where these things will not be available because we've started these dumb trade wars again.
Yeah. Marty, thank you for the call. I couldn't agree more that the trade wars are ridiculous and harmful, and that people like you and me are going to be paying for it out of our pockets. This is where we are. This is who we have as a president. And we have Mike Johnson, who is so desperate for Trump's approval that he will not in any way, shape, or form. Because, the Senate, our U.S. Senate, passed a resolution with 4 Republican votes. So it passed that the law or the procedure that is allowing Trump to put tariffs on Canada, that be rescinded, because it is Congress that is supposed to have the power of tariffs. At least they're supposed to approve everything, not the president being able to do it on their own. The Senate passed that measure. Mike Johnson, through a procedural move, made it impossible for that measure to be taken up by the House of Representatives. So the Senate's a bipartisan majority in the Senate, voted that the rules that Trump is using to put tariffs on Canada should be rescinded. Mike Johnson said no. Let's go to the phone lines. Paul is on the line from Seattle. Hey, Paul, how are you today?
I've been better, but, I've been tracking the Dow, and I wish I tried to text when you were on with Terry to ask her, but I think the Dow Jones Industrial Average is now officially in bear market territory, because I think, and I wanted to ask to confirm this, I think that the 10% correction, I can't remember what the time period is. I think it's 30 days or 90 days. But in any case, it's down almost 9% in the last 2 days. And it has been falling for the last number of weeks. It's down over 15% since January, since in the last 90 days. So we're officially, I think nobody's saying this because the news media is worthless, absolutely worthless. But if this were Joe Biden, they didn't talk about his great economy, except now, I think maybe I heard it on your program that the Economist magazine afterwards gave the Biden term economy rave reviews. Of course, you didn't hear that while Biden was in office, and the Economist is a conservative magazine. But Now they give it rave reviews, and now I know that the stock market is not the economy, but it is a reflection of people's confidence. And when you look at it, and I've kept track of these things since Barack Obama was in office. Now, the economic recession of 2008, when Barack Obama took office, it hit bottom on March 9th, 2009, 48 days after Barack Obama took office. The Dow bottomed out at 65.42. And when he left office, the Dow was up it closed at 19,799, almost 19,800. It tripled under Obama. And when Donald Trump came into office, he came in at 19,799, and it hit a high of 30,000. Remember saying, it's a sacred number. But that was on November 24th, 2020, 3 weeks exactly after he lost the election was the sacred number. But Joe Biden's economy, let's say, started at 30,000. It was flirting with 46,000. So it was even. Those are both 50% deal. 50% for Trump, it grew 50%. But Biden's actual total points were more, and actually a little bit more. He grew a little bit more than 50%. Now where the Dow is now, half of the gains that were accumulated over Biden's term are gone as of yesterday and today.
I was.
You got to go through some pain, huh?
Yeah. I was looking for that Economist article. I'm not a subscriber, so I can't read the whole thing, but this one sentence jumped out at me. Investors were shocked by the height and breadth of the new tariffs, the highest for over a century. Okay. And the title of the article is Financial Markets Flail in the Face of America's Tariffs. Asia is hit hardest, but nowhere looks good. Yeah, the rest of the world just doesn't know what to do with us. And frankly, the sad part is we don't know what to do with us.
Right. You mentioned the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930, and there was before that. They should have learned from the McKinley Tariff Act of 1890 was the same result. That was when William McKinley was congressman, and at that time that was Benjamin Harrison's term of office, one term, and then it gave way to the return of Grover Cleveland. Now I've heard Trump say, I'm like Grover Cleveland. No, but the thing is that Grover Cleveland got in the second term because of the stuff that Trump's doing. Trump's more like Benjamin Harrison. I mean, he's just, and all of this is I don't know what this is to just, because he thinks he's got this, it's all hostility. You hear from this whole administration that we're going to strong-arm people into doing things. And I talked to this right-winger out here, maybe you heard him, his name is Lars Larson yesterday, and he thinks this is all great. This is all, and just doesn't even they just don't even respond to the idea that, and yesterday the market was down, it was at 1.4%, actually closed at 3.8% down, but today it looks like it's going to close down. It was, last I looked, it was down 4.9%, almost 5%. We'll see what happens in the next 20 minutes. I saw an
article where somebody supposedly was quoting I don't know if this was a Trump administration official or just a congressional Republican, and they said, "Yeah, we don't care if it all burns down. That's what we want." So, yep, and that's what's happening. Thank you for the call, Paul. Real quick before we go to news, and by the way, it's Friday, so we're going to keep taking calls after the news. But real quick, let's go to Jim, who's on the line from Chicago. Hey, Jim.
Hi, Joan. That story you pounced on from the Atlantic, Jeffrey Gopher story, the obvious is the obvious. But what isn't pointed out, Trump, the president, has never mentioned that conversation, as if he doesn't exist. And then he has QAnon people running in and out of the White House. And at their command, he's firing lifelong servants. My point is, what about his mental acuity? Has he farmed it out to? Has he farmed it out to Musk and so on and so forth? They know that he's not playing with a full deck, Joan. They know it because they're around him. So they have to take responsibility for some of these decisions. And I'm sure that Project 2025 is going to adapt by these billionaires, and they want to stuff it down our throats as fast as they can and see how far it can go. But I think that we're not going to take it, and I could bet my life that he's diminished capacity. That's all. Yeah. And anyway, let me say this real quick, Joe. The funniest line I've heard was Ron from Chicago. That's the funniest line I've heard since he took office. We've got Dr. Oz, Dr. Phil. Where's Dr. Chicago? Anyway, you have a great weekend, Jonah. Thank you, dear.
Thank you, Jim. Always appreciate the call. Yeah, Trump is talking about running for a third term. What's he going to be, like 80, 82? He's going to be older than Biden. Yeah, good luck with that, Donald, even if you can figure out how to break all the laws on the books. You think J.D. Vance is going to be satisfied being your handmaiden for another 4 years? Think again, buddy. Think again. I don't care how useful an idiot you are. We are going to take a break for news. We are going to take more of your calls right on the other side.
Remember when you get to work to hop over to WCPT820.com or the TuneIn Radio app and stream The Stephanie Miller Show. Weekdays 8 to 11 a.m. on Chicago's Progressive Talk, where facts matter. Chicago's Progressive Talk, WCPT 820, where facts matter.
Time for Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive.
Joan, as always, exceptional work from you from, your TV days all the way up to today. You're truly exceptional, and thanks for this great show you have.
It's time for Joan Esposito on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
We are taking your calls and reading your texts. 773-763-9278. Somebody texted in that they could not find the link to the Verge article on digital security. They couldn't find it on my Blue Sky. That may be because my original Blue Sky account, which was, I think, Joan Esposito CHI, I lost all the passwords for it. And even though there's a few thousand people who were following me, I am very sorry, but I can no longer get into that account. I can't post. I can't even get into it to delete it. Blue Sky technical help doesn't seem to be able to figure out what the problem is. So that account is no good. And I'm sorry if you're one of the couple thousand people who were following me there. I started a new Blue Sky account recently, and I have the passwords for this one. So if you're looking for me on Blue Sky, it's at joanesposito.bsky.social. No more CHI after my name. It's just my name, joanesposito.bsky at joanesposito.bsky.social. Good God. Get it out, woman. It's the picture, if you look, it is the picture that Paul Natkin took of me many years ago, and I'm wearing Tony Esposito's hockey jersey, in case you're wondering why I am dressed so oddly. I borrowed Tony Esposito's jersey for a picture taken by the rock and roll photographer Paul Natkin. It's one of my favorite pictures ever that's ever been taken of me. And that's the one. And I just rejoined, so you're going to go, what? She only has, 500-600 followers? Yeah, it's a process. I had to walk away from the old account. I can't get into it anymore. I can't post. I can't delete it. I can't do anything. So just plain old Joan Esposito. That's where you'll find me today. And that is also, by the way, where you will find the link to the Verge article on how to make sure you protect your digital security when you go to a protest. It's full of good information. Okay, let's go to the phone lines. Our good friend Ron is on the line from Chicago. Hey, Ron, how are you?
Oh, pretty good. Yes, Trump thinks that if the Federal Reserve lowers the interest rates, that's going to turn things around. This is just one of those delusions and illusions. It's not going to do anything.
Yeah. Yep. By the way, did you hear the shout-out that you got from Jim right before he went to news?
No.
He was talking about something that you'd said on the air and how he thought you were spot on. I just thought I should pass along the compliment.
Well, what was that? What did I say?
Some phrase you used, and it's because I was looking at blue sky. My mind has emptied. I can't remember. I'm sorry. I should have written it down when he said it.
All right. And there's coffee is not grown here, so we should expect the price of coffee to double pretty soon.
You're right. That's just another thing that we are going to see go up. People, we really don't understand. We are now a global economy. We truly are. And when you buy something, unless it's like a piece of clothing and it absolutely tells you where it came from, you don't know. If you buy coffee, where was it grown? Maybe if it says that Kona coffee from Hawaii, maybe you know then. But, I think we're all going to be really, really shocked. Are you going to be buying French wine? It looks like we're all going to be buying California wine. Whatever. So it goes.
Yeah, if I can quote Ben Stein for a moment, Nicholas, who is the worst president in our history?
Mm-hmm. Anyone?
Donald J. Trump. And why did he become president? Anyone? Because he lied to us.
Yep. And people believed the lies. People who didn't remember how he lied last time, and a guy who tells 30,000 lies when he's president the first time around. Why did people all of a sudden think he was telling the truth? That's the part that I find very puzzling.
Right.
Very puzzling.
Right.
Yeah.
And also he said that the stock market has a little disturbance. Is there anything like a little atomic bomb?
Yeah, exactly. A little bit pregnant. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. All right.
Yep.
All right.
Thank you. Thanks, Ron. Let's go to Roosevelt. Our good friend Roosevelt is on the line. Hey, how are you today?
Joan, thank you for taking my call.
You're welcome.
Before anything, have a nice weekend.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, several things. First of all, Ben Stein. I knew I had read something about him that was really ridiculous. So I found the article. Newsweek, I believe it was September of 22. He made a statement, and he got a lot of pushback on the fact that he made a statement that both Nixon and Trump were kicked out of office. Now, when was Trump kicked out of office? When was Nixon kicked out of office? By his own party. They do the right thing type of thing. So he was never kicked out of office. But Ben Stein is a real knucklehead. That's what I wanted to say about him. Now, I wish you had Savage on, because I would have asked her, but I'm going to ask you. In your professional opinion, what do you think these guys are up to? Are they trying to do this crypto thing? Are they trying to play the game of
honestly,
buy low,
Roosevelt,
sell high?
I think it's more basic than that. I think Donald Trump thinks that imposing tariffs makes him look like a tough, strong guy. Look what I can do. I can make the rest of the world react. Look how powerful I am. I don't think he cares about the fact that hair dye is going to be more expensive or coffee is going to be more expensive. Remember, everything about Donald Trump, it doesn't have anything to do with the economy. It doesn't have anything to do with people. It doesn't have anything to do with our government. It's all about him. Do I look more powerful? Are more people going to love me? Am I going to get richer? Those are the three questions. And I think that he thinks that imposing tariffs makes him look like a strong guy. And when it would be so great if Mike Johnson would let the Congress vote on that same measure that was passed in the Senate that said, no, you can't put any tariffs on Canada. that doesn't fall under the purview of the law. You can't do that. But, because then he would learn that, he's not Mike Johnson is leading him to believe he is all powerful. Whatever Donald Trump wants, Mike Johnson wants to make it happen. Right now, we only have 2 branches of government. We really do, because of Mike Johnson and his desperate need to please Donald Trump. He is the most powerful guy, and he's throwing his weight around. And then what he's going to do is, like in his first term, Vietnam will say something like, okay, well, we'll put out a press release about how brilliant you are. Oh, okay. And then he'll say, well, I got them. I got concessions from them. I guess those tariffs really paid off, didn't they?
Yeah.
So anyway, that's what I think.
And Joan, about the markets, did you see the interview that Amy from Democracy Now! Had yesterday, I believe, with Richard Wolff? That was a doozy. Yeah, you guys, suggest you watch it. It's very, very interesting. He goes in detail what this guy's doing. He basically said he's throwing a Hail Mary and hope that everything works out. Hope that the ball bounces into his hands, basically.
Yeah.
Comparing it to a football game. And last but not least, and all of this about the markets, where's Maria Bartiromo? Is she an expert on the markets? How come she's not?
No, she's not an expert on the markets. She's an unofficial mouthpiece for Trump. Oh, well, yeah. Roosevelt, I got to go. I want to talk to one of the board members for Indivisible about the hands-off rally tomorrow, and she is waiting. So I need to go to a quick break. Thanks for the call. Lady B, let's take a quick break and go to Kathy after that.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Every weekday afternoon from 2 to 5 p.m. on WCPT 820.
As I said, tomorrow, Saturday, there are going to be hands-off protests, rallies all across the country. There is one accessible to you. There is going to be a big one in downtown Chicago. Indivisible, Move On, a number of organizations are getting the word out. Right now, I'd like to welcome Kathy Tholen, who is a board member for Indivisible, to tell us what is going to go on in Chicago. Kathy, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me, Joan. Great to be with you again.
Give the audience all the details. When, where, how?
Sure. Well, as you said, tomorrow is an incredibly important day. It's going to be the biggest show of protest against the Trump regime that we have seen so far. It will be all over the country. We are hoping that we are expecting that Chicago will come out in great numbers. And we are going to be at Daley Plaza tomorrow at noon for a rally and a march.
And do you have any feel right now for how many people you expect? I can tell you that Scott Duff, our Sunday host, Edwin Eisendrath, our Saturday host, have already posted publicly that they're going to be there.
So it's going to be the biggest action that we have seen since the Trump inauguration. I can't tell you how. If I make a guess, it's going to be wrong. But we have seen huge numbers of people signing up in advance, and we know that probably more people will come. I mean, as many people will come and show up than will sign up in advance. So, we have many thousands of people who have actually signed up in advance. And our partner organizations, various organizations have sign-ups. We expect a big crowd. It'll be energizing. It will be inspiring. It will send a real message, us and everyone around the country. So I just want to encourage everyone to come to make it even bigger than we, in our wildest dreams, hope it could be. And it's going to be a good day. It doesn't look like it's going to be raining. Even if it's raining, we will be there. But we expect a hefty crowd.
Yeah. I belong to the New Trier Democrats, and if anybody belongs to your local Democratic organization, you should check with them, because I can tell you the New Trier Democrats have a pre-protest poster party planned for tomorrow morning, where everybody can get together and make posters for the protest tomorrow. And there are protests in the suburbs as well.
There are some in the suburbs as well, a number of places as well. And we have seen that kind of energy all over the place. People having sign-making parties. I've got pictures of folks all around with sign-making parties. So people have been gathering. People have been spreading the word amongst their friends. People have been. I think this is the opportunity. If you've been out on actions before, we want you back. If you've never been out yet, we want you to come. And if you're someone who's been coming out, we want you to bring all your friends who haven't been out before. Right. Mm-hmm. This is really an opportunity for all of us to stand up and say very clearly that we want this to stop.
I know that this hands-off protest is the organization is Indivisible Chicago, Move On. What other groups, as far as you know, are getting involved in this effort?
Sure. Here in Chicago, there are groups that are leading this charge include the Chicago Federation of Labor, Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, the Sierra Club, Personal PAC, some other groups. There's dozens of organizations that have signed on as partners. Many dozens of organizations that have signed on as supporters of this. So there's a lot of local groups here nationally. Move On, Indivisible, the Working Families Party, lots of other, national groups are part of it. But all over the country, it's everything from chapters of Indivisible to, small local groups who are organizing. So
yeah.
it runs the gamut.
Yeah. One of the questions I have is, I talk to a number of people on this show, Kathy, about where we are and how this is so much worse than Trump's first term. And ordinarily, if somebody says something, I pay attention. But when multiple people say the same thing, I start to really focus on it. And I have had multiple people say to me that we may end up needing to actually call a general strike, where there's, like we see in Europe, everybody in France gets mad and they declare, a general strike, and the next day, the trains don't run and the stores don't open. We've never really in this country done anything on that massive a scale. But I've heard several people say to me that it might require, things are so bad and they seem so unresponsive in Washington that it may come to pass that we need to actually do a one-day general strike. Do you think that is the kind of thing that might happen, that could happen?
I know that this is going to be this fight is going to take some time, right? It's not like we expect a huge outpouring tomorrow. Do we expect that's going to change the trajectory of the Trump administration overnight? We do not, right? But we know it's part of the pathway to making change. And if that, I think it will require of us that we continue to make ourselves seen and heard. And there will be various ways people are going to be figuring out what the next step after this is. And there is lots of talk, about what that escalation looks like. And it could become a general strike. It could become larger mass protests. It could become many things. But we know that I think we all know that this is something we're going to be engaged in for some time.
You know, the Republicans in Congress who did have the courage to hold town halls and were screamed at and yelled at, they're all saying that those weren't legitimate voters. They were paid protesters. Would you like to address any Republicans listening now? Are you going to be how much will I get paid if I show up tomorrow, Kathy?
Yeah, that's right. We should all show up and ask for our money. But I think, that's what they say. But what they know is they're starting to be scared of their constituents, right? They know that's not true. And you just have to look across the border to the election we had earlier this week in Wisconsin. Now, yes, Elon Musk was in fact trying to pay people to on the other side, right? To get interested in the election, but look what happened, right? Our folks came out and voted, and people came out and voted, and people came out and said that they were not happy with what was going on, and they elected Susan Crawford by a wide margin for the Supreme Court. So, you just got to look at where have people had the opportunity to really make their voices heard, and you can see that it's not about people are really angry and they're really hurting and they're changing their behavior as a result. Look at the Florida elections; those margins of 30 points in November shrunk over 30 points, shrunk to 15 or less. In the special elections this week. So you just got to look to where people are, where they're standing up and making themselves heard, and those kinds of claims evaporate pretty quickly.
Hey, Kathy, one of my friends shared with me Verge magazine, The Verge, reprinted and updated an article that they had published first in June of 2020 about how to protect yourself digitally during a protest. Things like don't wear your smartwatch. If you bring your phone, set it on airplane mode, and all different kinds of ways that people can protect themselves. Are you concerned about digital security?
I think that it is important as this goes on for us to all learn about the ways that we can feel safe, because it's important that we feel safe and be safe in order to keep up the work we need to do. And I think that kind of information is useful, and I think everyone has their the things that they feel they need to do. And I hope that we don't get to the point where we're worried about people tracking our locations. But there are ways, as you said, to block that. And so I think it's important for people to understand what their options are for things like that.
Yeah. And I didn't realize this until I read the Verge article, but apparently the way our laws are set up, if law enforcement confiscates your phone, they can force you to use your fingerprint or your face to open it. But if you've set up a passcode, that is protected. That is protected by law. So they can't force you to put in your passcode. An interesting quirk of the law, but something that I think is important if somebody is going to be putting themselves in a risky situation. Not that tomorrow, I think, is going to be a risky situation. I've been in part of lots of the science protest, the women's march. I had my pink pussy hat, and I never felt, matter of fact, most of the cops that I saw as we were marching, they seemed kind of bored by the whole thing. They weren't, like they could have cared less. So I don't really think that we're going to find, a lot of problems here. But, you never know. It's all, I guess, better to be safe than sorry.
I think we can feel secure here. But I do think that it is useful to know. And what you're saying to me, I'm not aware of those. I haven't seen that article that you're referring to, and I'm not aware of those details. So it is valuable to know and be as informed as we can. But I don't think that we should be worried about tomorrow. Tomorrow will be a family-friendly event. It will be we are in an environment that supports this. Our right to stand up and voice our opinion. So I think we should not be afraid or,
yes,
here to speak up and voice our objections.
I wish that tomorrow is just so crowded and makes such an impression that there are ripples felt all the way to Washington, D.C., Kathy. And thank you so much.
I think there will be.
Can
I just say, if you come early, between like 11 and 11:30, we have a large store. We have a ton of hands-off signs. You can write your own hands-off whatever on the signs, or we have a lot of them that are like hands-off Medicare, hands-off Social Security, hands-off voting rights. So come and get a sign, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow.
Great. Thank you.
Will you be there, Joan?
I am unfortunately committed to a wedding tomorrow. So I am not going to be able to attend. But, man, this is going to be the first major protest in Chicago I've missed. And
well, you're doing your part by telling all your listeners, so thanks for that.
I made a commitment, and I'm sticking to it. So, tomorrow, if you get there early, it's going to be extra special fun. We are going to take a break. We are going to be back with more after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
There is a new book out. It is called Fight: Inside the Wildest Battle for the White House. It is written by Jonathan Allen and Amy Parnes, and Amy is here to talk about her new book. Congratulations, Amy.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
The wildest. I've read a lot of books that talk about campaigns, and I've never heard the term wildest used. It's sort of like an analysis, what went right, what went wrong, but never the wildest battle for the White House, though it does seem that this last go-round was unique in a lot of ways. So talk a little bit about what does the book cover?
So it was a very unprecedented election. My co-author and I this is our third campaign book, our fourth book in total. And our last two books, we covered the 2020 election and the 2016 election. We thought that those were pretty unprecedented. But when we saw what happened in late June after the presidential debate, where Biden essentially fell apart on stage, our publisher came to us and asked if we were interested in doing yet another book on this campaign. And we had no idea just how interesting it would be. I mean, there were two attempted assassinations on the Republican side. There was a candidate switch on the Democratic side. Hollywood couldn't make this stuff up.
Yeah, really. It would have been considered an over-the-top pitch. Oh, scale that back, buddy. That's not real. One of the things that I found most fascinating, though, was the fact, we saw Joe Biden say he wasn't going to run. In the very next breath, he was promoting Kamala. And it just seemed like, that was his intent the whole time. But you found out behind the scenes that wasn't as certain as it looked to us. Talk about that.
Yeah, so obviously he supports Kamala Harris. She was his vice president, and it was expected that he would get behind her. But she actually had to, number one, was ready to coalesce support around her candidacy. Her aides were already in the planning stages, well ahead of the time he decided to step down from the race and step aside. And so it's funny, just a couple of hours before he decided not to continue to run, her aides were meeting in her pool house at the Naval Observatory in Washington, where they were planning, what would happen and when it would happen. And they were expecting that maybe he would drop out later that week. They had no idea that they were about an hour away from such a historical marker. And it's interesting because when she does get on the phone with President Biden at the time, and she asks if he's sure, and he says, yeah, I'm sure. But then, and this has never been reported before until our book, she says, well, are you going to endorse me? And he says, yeah, but I'm going to endorse you probably later in the week. And that was unacceptable to her. She needed his endorsement very quickly because she knew that other Democrats were considering jumping in and time was of the essence.
Well, and don't you also report that one of the people who wasn't going to jump in but who thought that there should be an open primary was Barack Obama?
Yeah, and he had told a lot of confidants and allies quietly that he didn't think that she could win, and he was taking the temperature of a lot of Democrats around the country. People would call him, and he would call. He was on the phone a couple of times with Nancy Pelosi. We know that a couple of calls between those two leaders occurred, and he really wanted to see what the other options were, because he wasn't convinced entirely that she could win. Wow, that's amazing. I don't know how far back. When does at what point do you start reporting this? When Biden opts out, or because there's supposedly in May there's a couple of books coming out about how behind the scenes, at least his staff knew that Joe Biden was really in no shape to run again, but instead of encouraging him to, be the transition president he promised to be, they were circling the wagons and trying to prop him up. Do you go that far back? When do you start it? When does your timeline begin? So our timeline begins at the night of the debate, where he falls apart on stage. But we do have flashbacks, a number of flashbacks to other parts, in previous years, where we talked to a number of lawmakers and aides, other people around President Biden who reported exactly what they saw. We talked to Representative Swalwell from California, who mentioned that a year earlier, prior to the debate, he came face to face with President Biden, and President Biden didn't know who he was. And this was someone he competed against in the 2020 election. And while Swalwell is a rank-and-file member, he should know who he is, competing against him in the 2020 election. And we talked to other people. He needed it wasn't just in terms of, his cognitive abilities. I think that the White House was worried about the optics around his age. And so a couple of aides told us about how he needed to meet a makeup artist when he was traveling on the road. So the first order of business each time he traveled was to have a makeup artist make him up for for his start of the day, and sometimes that resulted in some missed meetings. So this was happening all the way around. And while we don't know if there was an intentional cover-up, they were clearly aware of the fact that the president was having cognitive issues, and they were clearly worried about the optics around his age.
Yeah. Amy, talk about that night of the disastrous debate. What have you learned about that night?
So we take you inside. We start the book, actually, inside Nancy Pelosi's living room, where she is watching the debate unfold that night. And she's alone. She wanted to be alone that night to kind of to see what was happening. Jim Clyburn, another Democratic leader, watching the debate alone with a drink. Al Sharpton, also by himself. It's almost as if they knew that night was not going to go great. Usually these types of events, lawmakers like to gather and watch these things together, but they purposely were alone watching this. And when it does unfold, Nancy Pelosi's cell phone is blowing up. Everyone's cell phone is blowing up. Mine was too. I mean, everyone involved in politics that night was experiencing something so surreal. And Nancy Pelosi was receiving incoming from lots of lawmakers and donors. One donor in particular said this is a disaster and sent her a note. And she thought she was about to send a note to her husband, but instead of sending it to her husband, she replied back to the donor and said, "Oh my God, this donor thinks that this is a disaster." And so we have all of this reported in the book in great length to kind of show exactly what the tone was and what each lawmaker and each leader, Democratic leader, was experiencing in that moment.
That's just amazing, because one of the things that I said, I know that sometimes it seems like the longer somebody is in political life, the more that anybody who's willing to say no to them gets sort of eliminated from the inner circle, and the inner circle becomes this, you're great, you're wonderful, you're the best, you're better than all the rest circle. And because I thought to myself, because right before he went out on stage, why didn't somebody say, Mr. President, you are in no shape to do this tonight. This could ruin everything. We're going to just announce that you've just tested positive for COVID. We're going to take you off, and you can make the announcement that, next week, once you're testing negative, you'll do this debate again. But, you've just done these 2 international flights. You're not feeling well as it is, and you have the potential to destroy yourself tonight. Why did nobody say that, Amy?
Yeah, well, for starters, so he had COVID a few weeks later, but this was a cold. And he went, it's funny because Jill Biden was meeting with donors ahead of the debate. There was a gathering of donors in Atlanta, and she walked into the room and she said, "Oh, he's ready to go, and we're going to do great tonight." And, in retrospect, that probably wasn't the best thing to say when her husband was in the midst of a pretty bad cold. But they felt like the reason they did this debate was to change the trajectory of the race. They weren't happy with how things were going. They felt like they needed to do something drastic to move the polls. They were facing Trump, who was on an upward trajectory, and they were kind of stagnant. And so, but they never really anticipated that it would go so badly. Even in debate prep going into this night, the president seemed like he was okay. They said that he was coughing and blowing his nose a little bit, but it seemed like he was, ready to go. And it turns out he wasn't. And they thought that if they would have pulled down the debate and said that he couldn't do it, that it almost would have been worse. So, and then sure enough, a few weeks later, the nail in the coffin was when he did get COVID. He was in Nevada at an event, and he had to pull down another event to go home. And I remember, when we talked to aides about that moment, about him, going home and feeling dejected, it seemed like that was very much the nail in the coffin moment.
Interesting. We're going to take a break. I am speaking with Amy Parnes along with Jonathan Allen. They have written Fight Inside the Wildest Battle for the White House. We are going to find out more about her reporting right after this.
If you've missed any of today's show, you can listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, YouTube, Amazon, or HeartlandSignal.com. Just search for Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive.
Hey Google, play WCPT.
Streaming Chicago's progressive talk from TuneIn.
Don't turn that dial. Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, returns right now.
A fair balance where the facts come out.
On WCPT 820.
I am joined by Amy Parnes. The book is called Fight. It is inside the campaign that started with Trump and Biden ended up with Trump and Kamala Harris. Amy, I want you to talk about, you mentioned Nancy Pelosi and that the night she watched the horrible debate performance. Something else you report in your book is that not only did Barack Obama have doubts about Kamala's ability to win, so did Nancy Pelosi. I believe the phrase you wrote was, if he goes, she goes. Talk about that.
Yeah, I think right away. I mean, starting the night of the debate, her big concern was that if Joe Biden was to leave the race, that Kamala Harris would be the automatic nominee, and she wasn't really happy with that. She thought that, that there should be more of a process. And then she did tell confidants in the days following that she felt like if the president were to step away from the race, that Kamala Harris should as well. And this goes to the point that I was making earlier, which is that she and Barack Obama were looking for other alternatives. But the fact of the matter is that they were short on time and the clock was running low. They had to move very quickly. And Democrats knew that time was of the essence. There were 100+ days left of the race, and they were really nervous about doing something other than just giving this to Kamala Harris. So that's sort of what ended up happening. I mean, at the time, I remember a source told us, well, at least she has a pulse. And that was sort of where Democrats were, that she could kind of, take the torch from President Biden and run with it. I think in a way, Democrats were, gaslit in a way because they saw that she was attracting all these big rallies and lots of people and lots of excitement. But in reality, the message wasn't there. She wasn't connecting with voters. She wasn't doing things like what Trump was doing on the other side, which is using podcasts to her advantage. They were almost running a playbook from, 2016 or 2020 and not really connecting with voters.
Yeah. I want to talk, I love talking about behind the scenes with Kamala Harris and Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden, but I also want to talk about your behind the scenes reporting about what was going on in Trump world. Give us a little sketch of that.
Well, yeah, everyone likes to talk about what was going on the Democratic side, but we also focus a great deal on what was going on the Republican side. And there were battles there, too. Specifically right after Kamala Harris and the switch, right after she takes over, Donald Trump got really, really nervous that he was out of the headlines suddenly. Everyone was focused on Kamala Harris. And he thought about switching up his campaign and going back to old advisors who were in charge of his previous. Exactly. So he brings in Corey Lewandowski and is almost testing the waters with him. And so there is this really tense moment where a lot of people think that he's really fed up with how the campaign is going and he's bringing in his old advisors. But, he, in the end, decides he pulls a very un-Trumpy move, which is he chooses stability over the chaos, and he keeps his top two, his lieutenants, Chris LaCivita and Susie Wiles. They remain the heads of the campaign. But it was really tense in that moment. And then we talk more about how he ends up picking J.D. Vance and what that was like, and the pressure campaign that, that his allies put on him. And there's one moment in particular where he's on his plane with his advisors, and Lindsey Graham, the senator from South Carolina, is on the plane, and Jason Miller, one of Trump's old senior advisors, is on the plane, and they're almost going at it about who should be the VP pick. Lindsey Graham is advocating for his friend Marco Rubio, the senator from Florida. Jason Miller is pushing J.D. Vance and is texting everyone he can think of to kind of lobby for Vance in that moment. And Trump is relishing it all. He loves the fight. And so we have all of these moments, too, that kind of pull back the curtain and take you behind the scenes on how these bigger moments happened on the Trump campaign.
I've always suspected that a big part of the selection of J.D. Vance was his ties to Peter Thiel. Donald Trump loves people who are richer than he is, hence, his bromance with Elon Musk. Did Peter Thiel being behind J.D. Vance influence that decision?
It might have. We don't have specific reporting on that, but what Donald Trump relishes more than anything is loyalty, and I think he saw a kinship with Vance. Of course, that's not really playing out the way he would like it right now. If you look at what's going on with the Signal chats from last week, you can see that, while J.D. Vance was trying to portray himself as very loyal, not only to Trump but to the MAGA movement, that he kind of has his own political aspirations in mind and is very willing to distance himself in the right moments from President Trump. Yeah, well, I don't know what other people said, but when the selection of J.D. Vance was made, I remember telling my audience, Donald Trump better sleep with one eye open for the future, because can't you just see J.D. Vance being the kind of guy that walks upstairs in the White House with a pillow and smothers him? I just don't see J.D. Vance. Yeah. He's certainly not Mike Pence, is he? No, and that's the thing is I think Trump picked him because he's younger and can kind of carry the torch of the MAGA movement forward. But he has his own. He has to almost watch his back here because he very much wants to, pick up where Trump left off in 2028. And it's not clear what Trump is willing to do in 2028, which is, the other thing that a lot of people are watching right now. Well, when Trump announced that he might run for another term and, he's consulted lawyers and they think that it would be legal for him to run again. But my first thought was not just that he was going to be in his early 80s and not just whether or not he could try to make a legal argument for, but what would J.D. Vance think about waiting another 4 years to throw his hat in the ring for the highest office in the land? I don't know. Yeah. We've learned that no matter no matter how crazy something Trump says is, you really can't discount it because he does crazy things every day of the week. But I just wonder how Mr. Vance would feel about that. And everybody was saying, Trump loves him because he's a Trump mini-me. Well, I don't think he's a Trump mini-me. I think he's an opportunist. I mean, let's face it, if you want a Trump mini-me, that would to me be more like Pete Hegseth, more... he's proven... Yeah, and he's proven, through that Signal chat, when you look at that, he's proven that he's not the loyalist that Trump thought he was. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Well, J.D. Vance used to say bad things about Donald Trump. So I'm wondering, and I know this was way before you started, putting things in your book, but what was that first conversation? Just that early stuff I said, I didn't mean any of that. It was just, it was I was a little tipsy that night, or I was being goaded, or how did J.D. Vance look at Donald Trump and say, I hated you, but I don't hate you anymore. I really love you now. Yeah, they covered that turf very early on in that first meeting they had at Mar-a-Lago, and that meeting was actually the day of the attempted assassination. In the morning, he flies in to meet with him, and they cover that turf. And he essentially said, I didn't know back then, and he was trying to make excuses for it, and was trying to appeal to Trump about how loyal he would be. And that's sort of the pitch he made and the pitch that other allies made for him. And so I think that, loyalty is going to be a big thing to watch with the two of them. And obviously it's already quite frayed. Yeah. Interesting. How did the assassination affect Trump? Did it change anything about him? We talked to people about this, and they said that he became a little more religious. I have my doubts about that. I think it's, I don't quite believe that to be true. But I do think, we report a great deal about what the Biden campaign was thinking at the time. And they thought that the race was over. They thought, we talked to a lot of people inside the campaign about that night. And obviously they had to pull down everything and they couldn't continue on with their campaign for a few days, which I think also helped and hurt President Biden in that moment. But I think, they were really, really worried about that image, with Trump's fist in the air. They all acknowledged that it was a powerful image. And one aide who happened to be home, a very senior aide on the campaign, happened to be home with his mom, visiting his mom at the time. And his mom even told him, "Oh, well, the campaign is essentially over." And he didn't want to hear that, obviously.
Wow. Interesting. So interesting. Amy, I can't wait to pick up the book. It is Fight Inside the Wildest Battle for the White House, Jonathan Allen and Amy Parnes. It's like a telenovela, it's got so much drama.
It really is. And, it wasn't intended to be that way. It's just the way it all unfolded. And the thing that is interesting about this is we don't just write these books. This is our third campaign book. We don't just write them just to have, fun with this and to document it. It's really a look ahead. And any smart Democrat will read this, and Republican too will read this and say, these are the mistakes that were made, and this is how we have to do better. This is a guide to lead us out of the wilderness. And that is why we do these books, not just to look back, but in an effort to look forward.
Yes. Real quick before I let you go, and this isn't anything that's from the book, there's been a lot of pushback against Gavin Newsom for having Steve Bannon on his podcast. He clearly wanted to show that he'll talk to anybody, but you'd think he'd have maybe found somebody other than a lying convicted felon. I don't know, just, me. And supposedly, within a week, his popularity dropped something like 10 points. Was that a good move or a bad move? Does that position him well or hurt him if he wants to be the Democratic nominee?
I think it hurts him with the base, but I think he's trying to do something which is to, a lot of Democrats are trying to figure out where they need to be right now and whether they need to move back to the right and if they need to have these conversations with Republicans. And I think he's trying to experiment, obviously, with that and try to see, position himself well. But I think, it did hurt him with the base, I would say, considerably. But it remains to be seen if that's sort of what a lot of Democrats want from him in this moment. They really liked him when he was fighting Republicans even before the election happened. They liked that fighter in him and that he was taking on Ron DeSantis and Trump. And so I think if he moves back in that direction, that might be a good move for him. But I think he's also trying to see what he needs to do to be competitive in 2028.
Yeah. If you have a chance to talk to him, you might want to tell him the story of Kyrsten Sinema and how that move to the right really launched her into the stratosphere. Amy Parnes, man, oh man, if you're going to pick up a political book in the next few months, make it Fight Inside the Wildest Battle for the White House. Amy, thank you for being here. It has been a delight to talk to you.
Thank you so much, and let me know what you think of it. I'm very curious to hear what your thoughts are.
I can't wait. We are going to take a break for news. We're going to be back with so much more after this.
It's time for Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive.
I want somebody who's passionate. I want somebody who can talk to people like a real person, who can make people feel things, who can make people want to follow them.
It's time for Joan Esposito on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
Congressman Mike Quigley represents Illinois' 5th District. He has been a big supporter of Ukraine. He co-chairs a Ukraine caucus in the Congress and joins us now to talk about that and tariffs and everything else. Mike, how are you today?
I'm good. Thank you. Good to be back.
It's good to have you back. I've been reading recently that with all the immigration moves that are coming out of the Trump administration, that Ukrainians who sought refuge here to get away from the war are now very, very worried that their status is in jeopardy. Where does that stand right now?
You know, it's one of those things where it's an opaque administration. We'd like to find out what they're going to do next, but as you can see, they are as unpredictable as they can possibly be. Our Ukrainian friends aren't the only ones. There are others who have left war-torn areas like Afghanistan, and they have the same fears. So this is an administration that doesn't seem to have a heart, and if you're talking about coherent policy, I'm not sure they have the brain either.
Sure. Well, I know that a judge just ruled today that the father of three who was due to an administrative error was swept up in an immigration raid now has to be returned to his family. The judge ruled that he must be returned to his family, even though my understanding is lawyers for Trump said, you know what? We really can't. We can't go. We don't know exactly where he is. You know, we probably can't find him. But the judge said, you know what? You find him, you bring him home. And now I guess we wait and see whether or not the Trump administration drags its feet or actually agrees to do that.
Well, it's reminiscent of the first Trump administration when they were splitting families apart as they were being shipped out of the country. And some of those families were never able to find each other again, needle in the haystack. So, unfortunately, this is repeating itself unnecessarily.
I just was looking at that judge ruling, and not only did the judge rule that this guy has to be returned, but Kilmar Abrego Garcia has to be returned by April 7th at 11:59 p.m. Well, I guess we're not going to wait long to see whether or not it happens.
Yeah, I agree. Look, we're all kind of worried and anxious to see what happens when and if the Trump administration overtly rejects a judicial finding. The old Andrew Jackson threat, you've got your ruling, now enforce it. This goes way back to the Federalist Papers, where when they were advocating for the Constitution, they acknowledged the fact that courts don't have the independent ability to enforce their rulings. They have civil, they have criminal, but in the end, they're all enforced by the executive branch. Individuals who commit, violate these rulings, they can be held in contempt, but the President of the United States can bail them out of that. So I think the mere fact that we're talking about that and thinking about it tells us that we are already in a constitutional crisis. The courts, I think, for the most part, have done their part. I think for the most part they have stepped up. It's frustrating for us as members of Congress because I know some people aren't aware. We don't have the standing to sue. In other words, Leader Jeffries doesn't have standing to sue. Members of Congress don't to enforce some of these issues in actions. What we can do is sign on to amicus briefs to support them. We can coordinate and work with organizations that are part of these lawsuits. But at this point in time, all we can do is use our vote and our voice, try to get the president to do the right thing.
Yeah. And now let's segue over to tariffs. Today, the Wall Street Journal digital headline, 2,200-point drop in Dow ends brutal week for stocks. How much more pain before the winning starts, Mike? When does the winning start?
Well, what I try to do with a circumstance like this, if I quote the New York Times or the Washington Post to some of my conservative friends in Congress, they're just going to shrug. But you're quoted one of the headlines, but here's some others from the op-ed from the Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal says the dumbest trade war in history. Another one, a $6 trillion Trump tax increase. The Cato Institute. These are all pretty conservative entities. Reciprocal tariffs are Trump's worst trade idea yet. They will create havoc. They will make everything cost more. But what I really like listeners to pick up on is this. When you combine it with a foreign policy that dictates isolationism and clings closer to people like Putin, right? There's no tariffs on Russia yet. There's no tariffs on North Korea yet. And you're telling the rest of the world, you're telling NATO that it's on its own, and you're tariffing your best friends. And even if they weren't your best friends, trade with Mexico and Canada is so tied into our economy that it's going to play havoc on both countries, all three countries. And the fact is, Europe is probably going to work together to put together retaliatory tariffs against us, which will hurt farmers, which will hurt almost every aspect of our economy. It's going to hurt us in Chicago because everything will cost more. It will cost more to build houses. It will cost more to buy fruits and vegetables. There will be some fruits and vegetables you won't be able to get. So, look, I don't know where the bottom of this is. The winning, let's just say you can make a case for this, that things will, more cars will be built here. It takes a long time to shift production, to have it move someplace else. And in the meantime, the economy in the world moves very swiftly elsewhere. We are, 5% of the world's market in population. They're not going to wait around for us. They're going to be able to work without us. It's arrogant to think otherwise.
I saw a presentation by Tom Skilling and Don Wubbles on climate change Wednesday at the City Club of Chicago. And one of the fears that they addressed, because it isn't just climate change research that's being cut, it's all of science. And a lot of scientists at universities are finding their funding disappearing. They're very worried that by the time the Trump administration is over, we might be in such a deep hole that we're never really going to catch up with the rest of the world. Do you share that fear?
I do. And, I try to put this in a few headings. I try to tell people you're going to be less safe because what Trump administration is doing. Everything's going to cost more. You'll be less free. And everyone will be hurt by this. So, when you're talking about research that deals with things like healthcare, cancer research, that's not going to affect somebody else. That's going to affect you or someone you know. Obviously, you're talking about climate change. One of the concerns I have is there is so much going on. Mm-hmm. Issues like climate change aren't on the front page. I think it's probably the issue that our grandchildren would be most angry with us about. So, look, you're worried about health care, cuts to VA and health care for veterans, Medicaid, U.S. EPA, not just the research part of this, but keeping our air clean, avoiding the precursors to ozone. Obviously, the research that you're talking about, but the double whammy of USAID, CDC, and Health and Human Services cuts, we're going to find out how small the world is in a hurry because when pandemics start someplace else, because we're not helping with vaccinations, they don't stay there. What happens over there comes over here, and it's going to bite us too.
Yeah. Mike, thank you so much for joining us. I also want to say I was at a concert at the Old Town School of Folk Music last night, and Rufus Wainwright asked the crowd if Trump invades Canada, would the people in the crowd go to Canada and help them fight? And I've got to say it was a roaring applause, yes. So please, let's not have it come to that.
Fair enough. I like Canadian hockey players, too.
Yeah. Mike Quigley represents Illinois' 5th District with his elbows out. We are going to take a break and be back with more. Let's talk Florida when we come back.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I am very pleased to welcome back to the program Anders Croy, the person who brings us all the news of what is going on in Florida. Florida, which just had a very exciting couple of special elections. Anders, how are you?
I'm doing well, Joan. Thank you so much for having me back to speak with you and your listeners today.
You know, everybody was focused on Wisconsin. Oh, my goodness, Susan Crawford, beat Brad Schimmel by 10 percentage points, which is just, in Wisconsin, that's a landslide. And there was a little bit less focus on the 2 special congressional elections in Florida. People were maybe disappointed that neither Democrat won, but those are really super, super red districts. I was reading that at least in one of them, that's been so red for so long that frequently Republicans running for the congressional seat don't even bother to campaign. It's so sewn up. So tell me what happened there.
So there were certainly some encouraging signs in Florida on Tuesday night. As you mentioned, we did have 2 special elections here, and they were in 2 very red seats. One of those seats was Congressional District 1. That was the seat that had been vacated by Matt Gaetz. It is a plus 37 Trump district, an extremely red portion of the Florida Panhandle, a very veteran-heavy portion of the state. To give you an idea as well how red the seat has been for how long, this was old Morning Joe Scarborough's seat back when he was still in Congress many years ago at this point. The other seat that was up was Congressional District 6. This is the seat that was vacated by the new National Security Advisor, Michael Waltz. That was a plus 30 Trump district this election cycle, going back to the 2024 election. What we saw on Tuesday night were incredibly encouraging signs of historic Democratic overperformance. I want to start with District 1 because I feel like there was a lot of attention that actually got put on District 6 because of how bad the candidate was there, and that there were some public polls that got leaked out that showed the race might be close. But what happened in District 1 is really an incredible look at how fired up the people are here in the state of Florida and what these cuts that are happening through Elon Musk and all of Donald Trump's billionaire buddies to the federal government are doing to the people of our state. In District 1, Gay Valamont ran an extremely good campaign. She focused on those veterans in the district, talking extensively about the cuts to the VA, how that would affect the local hospital, how it would affect opioid crisis funding that has really impacted the rural areas of that district. And she focused on property insurance, which is a real big local issue here as rates have been skyrocketing over the last 6 to 8 years. And her opponent is the state's chief financial officer, Jimmy Patronis, who was in charge of regulating those very same insurance companies. So what happened? She lost the seat, but she lost it by 14 points. That's a 23-point improvement over what we saw just in November. And even more exciting, I think, for progressives here in the state of Florida, she flipped Escambia County. Now, Escambia County contains Pensacola, which is probably the bluest part of the district, but Escambia County had not gone for a Democrat in a federal election since United States Senator Bill Nelson won it in 2006. And no Democratic presidential candidate has won Escambia County since 1960. And to get even into a little bit more of the weeds and the details here, and I want to give a really big shout out to Matt Isabel, who runs a company called MCI Maps here in the state, who does really great data analysis. But Democrats in Congressional District 1, by percentage, actually outperformed Republicans. The voter registration advantage in this district is so heavily tilted to Republicans that while Democrats had about 40% of their voters turn out, only 31% of Republican voters turned out. So that shows where the excitement was, which side was more fired up. But there just wasn't enough Democrats to make up that difference. But even cutting that margin by what she did, that means that there were a ton of NPA voters. She probably won at least 60% of no-party voters in the district. and a bunch of crossover Republican voters who looked at what's happening, looked at their candidate in the district who ran a campaign that strictly said, I'm going to Washington, D.C. to do Donald Trump's bidding, had no other platform besides that. And they said, well, who is actually talking about the issues that are impacting us right now? Who's actually going to fight for us? And that's where you saw that candidate overperform. So I think that there are a lot of really encouraging signs. Even if you go over to CD6, which includes the Space Coast, Volusia County, which people in the Midwest may know, that's where Daytona Beach is. That county almost went blue as well. It was very, very close. The Democrat there actually held the advantage in terms of votes that were cast by mail and in early voting. It was an election day sort of swamp from Republicans that were able to turn the tide when it came to that. But I think if you woke up on Wednesday morning in Florida and you were a progressive, you said to yourself, wow, there are a lot of people who are paying attention to what's been happening in Washington, D.C. There's a way that we can make those cuts and that chaos and these handouts to billionaires and mega national, multinational corporations matter to people here. And we can fire them up and keep them engaged for the next 2 years and really start to turn the tide of what's been a horrible history of governance from Republicans here in Florida.
Do you think that those percentages, which might be lost on people who just look at, who wins, who loses, Josh Weil, lost, it's really too bad. But Democrats and Republicans tend to look past the surface, like you're saying, at the percentages, at the margins. I know that the guy who ran for state Senate in Pennsylvania, that's a state legislature, and he won a district that hadn't gone Democratic in 128 years. And some are saying that election has a lot to do with the fact that Elise Stefanik never made it over to the United Nations, but rather was asked to stay in her congressional district. Do you think that Republicans are really paying attention to this and that they're worried?
I think it is not a coincidence at all that Elise Stefanik's nomination was withdrawn the day before these special elections in Florida. I think they looked at what was happening down here. They saw what their internal numbers were, and they got scared. If Stefanik, I believe, is in about a plus 20 district, and they're looking at 23-point swings in the red panhandle of Florida, then what's going to happen in New York? So I think Florida here, which has really become the center of the MAGAverse over the last few years. The president makes his winter White House at Mar-a-Lago. So many people have moved here who are members of that sort of hangers-on entourage type look. We've obviously seen what Governor DeSantis, the way he has governed over the last 6+ years here in the state of Florida. So if you're looking for a canary in a coal mine, it's what's happening with rural panhandle voters in the state of Florida and retirees and working class voters on the Space Coast. One of the things that Josh Weil really talked a lot about that I think made a huge difference were those cuts to Medicare and Social Security. In his district, it's a very retiree-heavy area. Almost 60% of people in that district receive one of those earned benefits. So when you start talking about messing with people's freedom to live healthy, prosperous, and safe, you're going to have a problem. And Republicans, I think, recognize that if this is happening in Florida, it can certainly happen in New York, and it's certainly going to make them nervous as they start to think about a United States House map in 2026.
Well, there are other people on the Republican side who've said, there was a quote that I read, I think it was yesterday, where somebody was saying, well, if the midterms were held today, we would be just devastated. But it's, they're so far away that what's happening now doesn't really matter because people will forget. What do you think about that?
I would say that the organizing that we do today is what translates into victories in 2026. One of the great things that happened in these districts is that you saw Democrats outperform Republicans when it came to vote by mail. A couple years ago in the state of Florida, after the now president's false claims, the big lie about the stolen election in 2020, Republicans in Florida saw that the tide was turning when it came to vote by mail. For many years in the state of Florida, more Republicans than Democrats voted by mail. That changed in 2020. So how did Republicans in Florida react? They changed the rules. So now, instead of your vote-by-mail ballot request being on file for every 4 years, it's only on file through the next general election in the state of Florida. That means that after the 2024 election in the state, everybody's vote-by-mail ballot request was canceled. You had to renew those requests with your local supervisors of elections. What happened in these districts is that a ton of money was spent on field. I want to give you a couple numbers here as well. Democrats in CD1 and CD6 combined knocked on over 1 million doors. They made 3.1 million phone calls. They sent more than 1 million text messages, and they signed up thousands of voters who are Democrats, who are progressives, who are NPAs, who are fed up with what's happening here in the state of Florida to get a mail ballot, not just for that election, but for the 2026 election, for any local elections they may have before then. So what happens now absolutely matters when it comes to the 2026 election cycle, because this organizing is what translates into victories later on.
Yes, yes, yes. Anders Croy is the communications director at Florida Watch. We're going to take a real quick break and be back with more after this.
Facebook. Message us. Instagram. Follow us.
Twitter.
Tweet us.
They keep me connected.
Let's get social on the socials. WCPT 820.
This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I'm being joined by Anders Croy, communications director at Florida Watch. We have been talking about the two special congressional elections that just took place in Florida. And even though the Democrats didn't win, they cut very, very deeply into the numbers that Trump was able to get in those same districts, even basically a little over a year ago. Anders, one thing that I believe that most elected officials care about being reelected. Their number one priority is keeping their job. I think they want to do good things. They want to help people. But for most of them, they feel that they're the best person to do it, and they just can't help people if they don't get reelected. Florida, as you mentioned, has an older demographic that is a big part of the population. And yet, so far, Republicans seem to be willing to sit back and look at cuts to Medicaid, the potential for decimating Social Security, even if they don't, cut your check, the fact that you might not be able to pick up the phone and talk to somebody, the fact that your local Social Security office might be closed, which means you've got to drive further to show up somewhere in person. These seem like stupid moves if you want to keep the people of Florida happy. So if you don't keep the people of Florida happy, it would seem to me you don't keep your job. At what is the tipping point here, Anders?
I think Republicans in Florida over the last couple of years have started to get a little bit complacent. I will say, due to people moving to the state, they've been able to build up about 1 million voter registration advantage here in Florida. But they're not actually the fastest-growing voter bloc. The fastest-growing voter bloc in Florida continues to be no-party-affiliated voters. So it's people who are not picking a side when they're coming to the state. And so in previous elections, they've tended to vote Republican. A big part of that in Florida is that because Republicans do control so much of state government, they control the governor's office, the cabinet positions, they have sort of a fundraising monopoly here where they're able to drown out any opposition in millions of dollars of corporate-backed money as they do favors for those very same donors in Tallahassee and the state legislature. But I think what you're talking about is something they're going to start to take notice of. When we've kicked off this legislative session in Florida, and even beforehand, there was a lot of chest beating going on from Republicans in the state of Florida. They were talking about the massive landslide that Trump had won, and they were pushing all of these sort of far-right conservative ideas that were not going to actually address the big issues that the people of Florida keep saying are most important to them. If you look at public polling in our state, over and over and over again, the top issues are affordability, mainly based around the cost of property insurance and the cost of housing. The policies being put forward right now in Tallahassee aren't really addressing those things. And as you mentioned, what's happening in D.C. is going to make these challenges even worse, especially for seniors who are on fixed incomes, especially for folks who are working very, very hard to the bone every single day here in the state of Florida just to try to make ends meet, to try to keep a roof over their head. You know, one of the little dirty secrets here down in the state of Florida is that we do not actually pay our workers very well at all. We have a very service-based economy. In 66 out of 67 counties in the state of Florida, people make less than the median weekly wage than they would anywhere else in the country. So when you start talking about cutting benefits that folks have earned, when you start talking about cutting funding to our colleges and universities, to our healthcare system, to our public schools here in the state of Florida, you're really touching the hot stove. And I think what you're going to start to see, you've seen this a little bit during the 60-day legislative session here, which we're about halfway through now, is sort of a pullback. Some of the things that they were centering at the start of it, changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to Gulf of America, that's not really a big part of their messaging right now. Right now, they're trying to start to recenter themselves and talk about, the things that really matter to the people of Florida. But if anything, what Tuesday showed us is that what's actually happening is breaking through, that no amount of money, no amount of messaging is going to convince people that what they're seeing in their everyday lives, that their VA benefits are being cut, that the Veterans Hospital, that appointments are hard to get, that it's hard, almost impossible to get someone on the phone at the Social Security office, that your Medicare payments aren't coming through to your doctor, so you're not being able to get your next appointment. These are real-life impacts, and they're real-life impacts on the security of people, on their ability to feel safe and secure in their lives. And I do believe that that's going to make a big difference moving forward. And you're going to start to see a little bit of a recalibration in how Republicans are talking to people about issues here.
Wow. Didn't you say that is it the first congressional district that has a lot of veterans that live there?
It is. It's the most veteran-heavy district in the state, and it's the district that saw the largest swing on Tuesday.
I just can't believe, going after old people, going after veterans, going after poor people, and especially poor kids and the disabled. And we all know part of this, maybe the main part of this, is to provide that big tax cut that Donald Trump's billionaires have come to know and love. It will be amazing to me if by the time the midterms roll around, despite what that one Republican said, I think not only are people going to remember, I think people are going to still be hurting and maybe hurting more and even angrier than we saw this April 1st election. I don't see any end in sight for the things that are bringing the pain. Do you, Anders?
I don't, Joan. I saw this week a president who broke every single promise that he made on the campaign trail. This is a president who came into office saying that he was going to lower costs. These massive tariffs are going to raise costs on everything. Just to give you an anecdote, I have a friend of mine whose AC is broken, and the quote that they got from their HVAC person today was thousands of dollars more than it would have been had this happened a week ago.
Oh,
those are the types of things and those are the types of things that break through to folks, right? Those are the types of things that you know about in your life that make an impact. You're going to see those broken promises. You're going to look up in November of 2026, and you're going to say, wait, everything costs more. My wages haven't gone up. It's hard for me to get the earned benefits that I need. What am I going to do about my parents? They are not getting their Social Security check on time every month anymore. They can't go to the doctor. These are real issues for real people, and those issues don't go away overnight, especially when you have an administration in Washington, D.C. that seems intent on deepening the pain as hard as they possibly can instead of actually trying to work on behalf of everyday folks here in this country.
It is just extraordinary what is happening. Speaking of what is happening, tomorrow is April 5th. There are big hands-off protests planned all around the country. I mean, here in the Chicago area, we're very blue. We plan to have a very big turnout. Florida is getting bluer by the day. What kinds of actions do you know of that are going to take place tomorrow in your state?
I know we have at least 45 actions planned throughout the state of Florida tomorrow, and that includes some of our bigger cities, some of our bigger counties, but also in some areas that you wouldn't expect. Some darker red sort of more rural areas that I've seen that events have already been announced for. So I like to think of Tuesday as the kickoff. Tuesday was the kickoff to the organizing that's going to make the difference in people's lives and that's going to bring a more progressive vision of the state of Florida, one that actually focuses on lowering costs, raising wages, and building a brighter future for all of us. And I think you're going to see that this weekend as people turn out across the state to really just say enough is enough. And it's not just Washington, D.C. It's the people that are their local elected officials who aren't listening to them anymore at all. You know, one of the more egregious things happening right now in the state of Florida, Joan, is that Republicans in Tallahassee, with the support of Governor Ron DeSantis, are trying to gut our citizen-led amendment process here in the state of Florida. Here in Florida, which has already one of the strictest citizen-led amendment processes in the country, it takes almost 1 million petitions gathered to get onto the ballot. And then when you get onto the ballot, you have to get 60% in Florida, not a simple majority, a supermajority here, to pass a constitutional amendment to make change in the state of Florida. But Republicans saw that progressive policies are actually popular at the ballot box. Just to give you a short list of things that we've been able to accomplish through the citizen-led amendment process, in just the last few years, we have raised the minimum wage to $15 an hour. We have legalized medical marijuana in our state. We have spent hundreds of millions of dollars protecting our natural treasures here in Florida. And if you go back a little bit further, we reduced class sizes in the state of Florida. We established one of the country's first mandated universal voluntary pre-kindergarten programs. And to go even further back, we mandated term limits on politicians. So as Floridians went to the ballot box last fall and almost limited the right or limited government interference with abortions, got to 57%, almost legalized recreational marijuana for adults in the state, which got 56%. They said instead of listening to the people of Florida and coming back for this legislative session and repealing the state's near-total abortion ban or working to establish a framework for legalized recreational marijuana for adults in the state, they've said that they're going to try to make this process nearly impossible moving forward. So that is a sign of the misplaced priorities of Republican leadership here in the state of Florida. And when you combine what's happening at the local level with the chaos and the destruction that's happening in Washington, D.C., I think you're going to see a sea change among folks when they go to the ballot box in 2026 about who they want in charge and who they want making the decisions about what's going to impact their lives moving forward.
Anders, we need to take a break. I'm speaking with Anders Croy, Communications Director at Florida Watch. We are going to continue our discussion right after this.
There's no excuse to miss Joan Esposito.
It's number one on my stereo.
Live, local, and progressive. You can listen to her daily at WCPT820.com on your computer or phone.
You're listening to WCPT 820 because facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Every weekday afternoon from 2 to 5 p.m. on WCPT 820.
I'm joined by Anders Croy, who is the communications director for Florida Watch. We are watching everything going on in Florida. And Anders, you said something a while ago that really resonated with me. You talked about how Democrats were out there organizing and making sure that people were renewing their ability to vote by mail and getting out there and getting them signed up and making sure that the registration was going to last them through the midterm elections. And I thought to myself, that is how Democrats win. Over the years I've been doing this program, and I can't tell you how many Democratic organizers have said, you just can't parachute into an area 6 or 8 weeks before an election, go knocking on doors and thinking that anybody is going to listen to you or take you seriously. You have to be there 365 days a year. People get to know you, get to understand what you're doing, see you as one of them and not some outsider who's come to our neighborhood to tell us how to vote. I mean, what you talked about, I think, is key to Democratic success.
I couldn't agree more. And I think in Florida, you really have the microcosm of the country as a whole. Here over the last few years, we have needed more investment. We have needed folks to make those on-the-ground organizing decisions that get people people involved at an earlier level. Because what we've seen is that, especially under Governor Ron DeSantis, Republicans spent the years under Biden sort of test driving the 2025 agenda that we're now seeing implemented at the national level. So what we've seen, gains that Republicans made with Hispanic voters, where strategies for engagement and persuasion were tested here. We saw those then left the state, went out to Latino communities in the Rio Grande Valley, in Arizona, in Nevada, with Puerto Rican voters in Pennsylvania. We saw them start to invest early on, many years ago, with working class voters of all partisanship across demographics here in the state of Florida. So what is going to be the thing that Democrats need both in Florida and nationwide to turn the tide on these gains is that early investment, is that early commitment to being on the ground, to meeting voters where they are, to learning what are the issues that are important to them so that you can give them the solutions that they need to trust you. Because I think a huge, huge issue right now is that voters don't really know who to trust. They aren't sure that Democrats have their best interests at heart, but they're also, seeing these broken promises from President Trump, from Republicans who said they were going to fight for working class voters, but have definitely gone to D.C. and under this new administration are doing the bidding of their billionaire and corporate elite donors, whether it's trying to extend the earlier tax cuts from Donald Trump and using cuts to Medicare and Social Security and Medicaid to pay for that, whether it's not focusing on lowering costs and putting in place these incredible tariffs that are going to raise the cost of everyday items for people all across the country. People need to know that there are people fighting back for them and that there is a progressive vision for this country and for our state here in Florida that will improve their lives, that will lower their costs, that will raise their wages, that will ensure that every single member of their family can live their own version of the American dream. Because what people want and what people need is to know that they are the heroes. They are the people who are working hard every single day, and that hard work deserves to pay off. And I think people are fed up with the fact that it hasn't paid off for them, and we need to be the ones as progressives who are showing them that there is a different way forward, and there are people willing to fight for that.
Yeah. Anders, you mentioned a few minutes ago you dropped the name Ron DeSantis. Is he just biding his time till 2028?
He is certainly flailing around like a lame duck stuck in a thunderstorm at the moment. Our governor here in the state of Florida is doing anything that he can possibly to get any sort of attention at all. Our Republican leadership here in the state House and the state Senate, besides doing his bidding and trying to help his war on citizen-led amendments, has really sort of ignored his priorities during this session here. So what you're seeing is he is trying to just make any sort of outlandish statement he possibly can, or he is just doing whatever possible to grovel at the feet of Donald Trump to try to get back in his good graces so that he can rebuild all of the political capital that he lost through his disastrous run for the presidency in 2024. The American people looked Ron DeSantis in the eyes, and they said absolutely not. And I think that he is trying to figure out any way, shape, or form that he can stay relevant, whether that is doing daily press conferences, whether that is trying out every single podcast mic that's available to him between Idaho, where he recently was, and back here in Florida, or powdering his face in Newsmax and Fox News green rooms day in and day out instead of actually doing his job here in the state of Florida. I can tell you what Floridians would want. They would like the governor to stop using our state's private jet as his own personal charter for his political ambitions and to actually focus on making our state more affordable, because under Ron DeSantis and his Florida vision for America, all of our costs have gone up. Things have gotten easier for the wealthiest and the most well-connected. Corporate profits are through the roof, but people in our state are continuing to struggle, while our governor seems to think the only struggle that he seems to care about is whether or not he'll be able to get his next Sean Hannity news hit.
Oh, boy. Oh, boy. Florida is always such an interesting state. Though I did read in the Wall Street Journal that the Sun Belt was taking a really bad real estate hit because people are so worried about insurance costs and they're so worried about bad storms. Because I've always thought, any place people retire to has got to be booming. Do you see a slowdown economically and in housing sales in Florida?
Florida's property insurance crisis is one of the leading things that are impacting pocketbooks here in the state of Florida. Since Ron DeSantis took office, property insurance costs in the state have increased by more than 100%. People here in Florida right now are paying more than 5 times the national average when it comes to property insurance. Now, that is actually starting to lead to a slowdown in home sales here in the state of Florida. People can't keep up. Home sales have also, the prices increased exponentially as people did move here during and right after the pandemic. So the governor, in that never-ending quest of his to try to stay relevant, is now trying to push a constitutional amendment in 2026 to repeal property taxes in the state of Florida, which would blow about a $50 billion hole in local government budgets across the state that would defund things like law enforcement and public safety at the local level, defund our public schools, defund parks and trash collection and paving your streets. And he's doing that as a favor to the Realtors Association, who is one of the governor's major donors here in the state of Florida. In fact, he held a press conference with the realtors earlier this week because they are so worried about how expensive it's getting to buy a home here in the state of Florida that they are grasping at any straws possible to make it seem like Florida is still an affordable place to live or raise a family.
Wow.
One other note on that, too, that there's really starting to be a lot of worry about that out-migration. While we did see a lot of folks coming in the pandemic, during the pandemic and immediately afterwards, there are signs that the out-migration from Florida, especially among 18 to 29-year-olds, is starting to take a toll. When you're graduating college here in the state of Florida right now, it's almost impossible to find a job that will then allow you to live comfortably on your own, and that's in a rental unit, much less buying a home here in the state of Florida. So we're starting to see a real brain drain, a real loss of young, talented workers, people that we're going to need for the future. And so actually I want to tell you, Joan, how our state legislature and the governor are responding to that. They're actually trying to roll back child labor laws again here in the state of Florida to let children as young as 13 years old work all the way through the night on a school night without a lunch break. That's the reaction here in Florida right now to some of these issues that we're facing. So there is a lot of work to be done here on a lot of different issues.
Wow. That's amazing to me. I mean, I've heard of other states who are starting to look at relaxing child labor laws to make up for, the loss of immigrants taking jobs. But I hadn't heard anything that radical. Does that property tax measure, do you think, oh, yeah, great, we don't want any more taxes. But people aren't so uninformed that they don't know that means no trash collection, that means none of the stuff that they're used to government doing. I mean, they make that connection, right?
So in order to get onto the ballot in 2026, so property taxes in Florida are in our state constitution. So to repeal them, they would have to go through the amendment process. Now, for politicians in the state of Florida, the state house and the state senate, through a 2/3 vote, can place amendments onto the ballot every 2 years. However, the governor is having trouble convincing the legislature to do this because they're looking at him and saying, well, how are we going to pay for all of these things, right? And I will give a little bit of credit to the state house right now. They're actually looking at a proposal to reduce the state sales tax by 0.75%, which would provide immediate financial relief to every working family and senior in the state of Florida, not just homeowners, which is who Ron DeSantis is targeting right now. And the good news about that property tax cut, although the Republicans aren't talking about this yet, is that there is a way to pay for that. Here in the state of Florida, if you make multinational corporations pay in-state corporate taxes on their profit, which they know, like right now they don't actually have to do. A lot of these large multinational corporations will say that profits that they made in Florida are actually part of their overall broader profits and they don't pay a corporate income tax here. We can do that. We can also close loopholes for the ultra wealthy on purchases of things like private jets, mega yachts, luxury vehicles. We could do all of that and give every working family and senior in the state of Florida a real tax cut that would actually have a real impact in their day-to-day lives, not sort of this shiny object that the governor is chasing that would actually only affect homeowners here in the state of Florida, and also, of course, his major donors that are trying to get this measure pushed.
Thank you so much, Anders Croy, for being here. We are out of time. Anders Croy, Communications Director at Florida Watch. We will continue to watch Florida with you, Anders. Thank you. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much, Joan. Always a pleasure.
That is, like as I said, that is going to wrap it up for me. Of course, Patty will be here on the other side of the news. And remember, you have to do something that brings you joy this weekend. It is very, very important. And if that thing happens to be attending a hands-off protest, then I applaud you. Like I said, Edwin Eisendrath is going to be downtown in Chicago. So is Scott Duff. Edwin has some taped interviews that are going to run during his show. The Guardian's Sam Levine, Pulitzer Prize winning journalist John Archibald is going to join him. It's going to be a wonderful show, as always. Patty has co-host Joe Kilgallen, and they're going to be talking in part about forest bathing, which is one of the things that might just bring you joy, okay? Think about it. Have fun. Cause good trouble. And I'll see you Monday. Good night.